Hey, who's that handsome guy? Both Cindy's husband Jim and their friend Barbara were taken aback by her question, even before they stepped through the backyard gate. Barbara followed Cindy's gaze and spotted a friend of Adam, Cindy's brother-in-law. Just so you know, I'm right here, Jim reminded his wife. What, can't I admire a good-looking guy when I see one? She retorted. Well, if you're going to check out some guy, I'd prefer if you kept it to yourself, Jim responded a bit bluntly before shifting his focus to their host. Hi, Barb. Sorry about that. Barbara and her husband, Tony, were hosting an outdoor birthday party for their daughter, who had just turned 13. Barbara saw them approaching, but hadn't greeted them yet. She chose to overlook Cindy's question. No worries, you two. Come on in, she said, still holding the gate. Where should these go? Jim asked, holding up a case of beer. There are a few coolers by the tree filled with ice, Jim. Some have soft drinks for the kids, but the others are for the beer. Just pick an empty one. Gifts go on that table over there, she directed Cindy, who was carrying a nicely wrapped box. Tony, the co-host, spotted them and came over to welcome them. Hey, welcome, you two, he said, kissing Cindy on the cheek. Jimbo, let me take that. As he reached for the case, Cindy made another attempt. Hey, Tony, who's the handsome guy sitting over there with your brother? Tony, a bit slow to catch on and unaware of the previous conversation, looked where Cindy had gestured. Oh, his name's Bob something. He works construction with Adam. Why, do you know him? No, but I wouldn't mind, she replied. I mean, what a hunk. Tony glanced at Jim, surprised. Not fully understanding the situation, he tried to lighten the mood. Watch out, Jim. Sounds like she's on the prowl, he joked. Jim was just as surprised. It seemed like his wife was trying to make him jealous for some reason, but he didn't want to ruin the party, so he chuckled it off and forced a smile. Yeah, sounds like she's ready to trade me in for a younger guy. That'll be the day, Barbara quipped, giving Jim's arm a playful slap. Well, come on in, you guys, Tony said. Barb, why don't you show Cindy where to put the gifts? When Barbara saw the expression on her husband's face, she understood exactly what he was implying. He hoped she would inquire about Cindy's behavior. En route to the gifts table, she lowered her voice to ensure no one else could overhear. Okay, Cin, what's happening? Did you and Jim have an argument or something? What do you mean? Don't give me that. We've all been friends for a long time, and I've never heard you speak like that in front of Jim. Something's up. I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He's out all day, flirting with every pretty girl he sees. You know Linda Kingston? Yeah. She saw Jim in a restaurant a few days ago. He obviously didn't notice her. She told me the waitress came over and kissed him. They talked and laughed through lunch, flirting the whole time. Cindy, Jim's a friendly, outgoing guy. That's just his personality. Having a girl kiss you is more than being friendly, Barb. It's crossing a line, and you know it. Tony kissed you on the cheek a minute ago. That's different. We've been friends for years. This is some waitress he flirts with when he goes there. I don't like it, and it definitely doesn't pass the wife test. The wife test? Yeah, you know, guys use it all the time, but for them, it's the husband test. A wife shouldn't do anything in public or private that she wouldn't do in front of her husband. Well, what's good for the goose, as they say. So, you chose my daughter's birthday party to give Jim a hard time? Don't worry, I won't do anything drastic. I wasn't even thinking about it until I saw Adam's friend over there. He's perfect. I just want to teach Jim a lesson. Well, do me a favor and don't start any fights, okay? I won't. Besides, look at that guy. He's built like a tank. Jim would be crazy to mess with him. All right. I see more guests coming up the walk, so I have to go do my meet and greet thing. I'll catch up with you later. Remember, no fights, okay? No fights, Barb, I promise. She glanced around and spotted Jennifer, the guest of honor, chatting with her friends. She decided to go over and wish her a happy birthday. Jim had just finished helping Tony with the beer and had the same idea. They both arrived at the same time. Cindy spoke first. Congrats, honey. You're officially a teenager. You can really give your parents a hard time now, she joked. That goes for me too, Jen, Jim added. The congrats part, I mean. I'm not sure about the giving your folks a hard time part, he teased. Jennifer laughed at Jim's joke. It was well known in their circle that she'd had a crush on him since she was a toddler. Thanks, she replied while giving Cindy a hug and Jim a kiss on the cheek. These are my friends, Coral, Kathy, and Debbie, she introduced. They chatted with Jen and her friends briefly, but Cindy was eager to proceed with her plan to teach Jim a lesson. Hey, sweetie, she addressed the birthday girl. I'm going to go say hi to your uncle. Catch you later. Jim was about to accompany her when he noticed Tony signaling to him. As Cindy began to walk away, he remarked, Behave yourself. She shot him a wicked glance. Approaching Tony, who was still by the coolers, Jim inquired, "What's up, buddy?" "Just wanted to give you a heads up," Barb talked to Cindy. "Seems like you've been flirting with some waitress. Cindy caught wind of it and has this idea to teach you a lesson. I'm guessing that's what all this hunk talk is about." Jim pondered for a moment. "I have no idea what she's talking about. I haven't flirted with any waitress that I'm aware of. Did she mention where or who supposedly saw me?" "I'm not sure. She didn't specify, but I think she's planning to use Bob to make you jealous, so try to stay cool, okay?" Meanwhile, as Tony and Jim conversed, Cindy approached her target. "Hi, Adam." "Hey, Cindy, how's it going?" "All right, I guess. Who's your handsome friend?" Adam was taken aback while his friend stood and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Bob. I assume you were talking about me, right?" he said with a charming grin. "Who else?" she replied. "Hey, Cindy," Adam interjected. "Where's Jim?" "He's over there chatting with your brother. I'd love one of those," she said, pointing to the beer Bob held. "Hey, Adam, why don't you be a gentleman and grab the lady a beer while we get to know each other better?" Not wanting to be rude, Adam obliged. As soon as he headed for the coolers, Bob offered Cindy his now vacant seat. As she sat down, she glanced over to see her husband glaring at her. Seeing his reaction only fueled her confidence that her plan was working. She turned to engage in conversation with her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, when Adam reached the coolers, he approached Tony and Jim. "Hey, what's up with Cindy?" "Why, what happened?" Jim inquired. "She's cozying up to Bob over there." "Who's he, anyway?" "He works with me. We're on that big high-rise downtown. I've known him about 6 months. Seems all right, but he's a bit of a ladies' man, and I wouldn't trust him around women." "He didn't bring a date?" Jim asked. "Nah, it was sort of a last-minute thing. He was supposed to play golf today. We got off work last night around 5, and he got a text canceling. Started complaining about having nothing to do today, so I invited him to the party." At least Jim now understood what his wife was up to, though he wasn't sure how to handle it. He knew Cindy well. Once she got an idea in her head, she wouldn't let it go until she made her point. Ignoring her might push her further, but confronting her might provoke Bob. He aimed to avoid that scenario at all costs. "Adam, do me a favor, will you? Just keep an eye on things. Let me know if it starts to get out of hand." Adam acknowledged Jim's instructions and grabbed a cold beer from the cooler before returning to where Bob and Cindy were engaged in conversation. Handing Cindy her beer and pulling up another chair, Adam felt it was time to interject, hoping Bob would catch the hint. He mentioned having seen the pictures Jim took of the lumberyard fire and praised his talent, wondering if Jim planned to enter the press photographers contest again that year. Though slightly annoyed by the interruption, Cindy politely replied that she assumed Jim would participate. She then informed Bob that her husband worked as a photographer for The Tribute and had won several awards at a state contest for press photographers the previous year. Bob responded with a hint of disdain, acknowledging Jim's presence across the room. Cindy confirmed it was indeed Jim, a response delivered with a dismissive tone that didn't go unnoticed by Bob or Adam. Bob shifted the conversation, expressing his enjoyment of working with his hands and constructing enduring structures. He then directed a question to Adam, asking for validation, to which Adam could only respond with agreement. Assuming Bob had effectively shut down the conversation about her husband, Cindy immediately resumed chatting with Bob, essentially excluding Adam from the discussion. He felt foolish. He'd heard Bob use that same line about working with his hands on women in bars before. It always seemed to impress them, and here Adam had unwittingly given Bob an opportunity. Feeling he was doing more damage than good, Adam excused himself to wish his niece happy birthday for what felt like the 20th time. Jim circulated, mingling with the others while closely observing Cindy and her companion. Although none of the men mentioned his wife's interaction with another man, the women began to gossip. Jim overheard Jenny discussing the situation with her friends, mentioning that the man Cindy was with worked as a newspaper photographer. She added that her dad commented on how photographers often find themselves in various challenging situations due to their job. Jenny expressed surprise that Jim hadn't intervened physically. Jim chuckled to himself. It wasn't really Bob's fault, after all. It was his wife's. And as frustrated as he sometimes felt, he'd never resort to violence against her or any other woman. Glancing over, he noticed an empty beer bottle next to Cindy's chair, and another in her hand already. She tended to drink more when she was nervous. This wasn't good. Bob had 3 empty bottles beside his chair. Just then, Tony mentioned that everyone seemed to be getting hungry as he stood by the grill. Jim, preoccupied with Cindy, hadn't even noticed the enticing aroma of grilling meat. Tony then announced the food options available, including burgers, brats, and chicken patties, along with various sides on the nearby table for everyone to help themselves. Jim thought it might be a good opportunity to separate Bob from his wife. Perhaps they could find a quiet corner to eat, and he could learn more about this person he was supposedly flirting with. As he turned toward them, he saw the potential lovebirds setting their beers down beside their chairs and standing up. Apparently, Bob had decided that Cindy was his for the day and possessively took her by the elbow. "Not happening," Jim muttered to himself. He quickly walked over. "Excuse me, could you remove your hand from my wife?" Bob immediately released Cindy's arm and raised both hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Sorry," he half chuckled. "We were just heading to get some food." "Yeah, well, I can handle it from here, thanks," Jim retorted angrily. He grasped Cindy's other elbow and led her over to the food table. "What's gotten into you?" Cindy questioned. "That was incredibly rude." Ignoring his wife's remark, Jim guided her in front of him as they joined the food line. "Grab some food," he stated flatly. "You and I are going to have a talk over by the shed while we eat." Observing the confrontation between Jim and Bob, Adam seized the chance to speak to his colleague, now alone for the first time in a while. "What are you doing?" he asked, irritated. "She's married to one of my brother's closest friends. Leave her alone." "Hey, man. You should be telling her to leave me alone. She's the one hitting on me. I'm just being polite." "Polite, my foot. Seriously, Bob, cut it out. Look, if you think you stand a chance with her, forget it. She's using you to get back at Jim over some waitress. Stay out of it. Listen, married or not, I've never turned down a beautiful woman like that in my life. I know women, and I think you're mistaken about her using me. She's genuinely interested, I can tell. I think you should leave. This is my niece's birthday party, and I don't want any trouble." All right, I'll back off. If she approaches me again, I'll send her right back to her husband, all right? If you don't, you're out of here, Bob. I mean it." "Scout's honor," he responded, holding up the Boy Scout salute. "Now, can I go get something to eat?" "Yeah, go ahead." Cindy wasn't particularly bothered by Jim stepping in between her and Bob. They had only known each other for a few hours, yet he was already becoming overly familiar, not to mention the suggestive comments he was making, although it amused her to see how easily she could manipulate a man like that when she wanted to. Still, she could sense from the way Jim had taken hold of her arm that she had pushed her husband as far as she should. She had promised Barbara no drama, and Jim had proven he wasn't intimidated by Bob's physique. She needed to spend the rest of the day with her husband. She just hoped he had learned his lesson. They both filled their plates with food, and Jim gestured toward the shed, away from the crowd. When they found a quiet spot, he handed Cindy his plate. "Here, hold this while I fetch a couple of chairs. I'll be right back." Despite his anger, Jim remained a gentleman, holding the back of her chair as Cindy sat down. He pulled his own chair alongside so they could talk privately. After a few bites, Jim couldn't contain himself any longer, as he was always direct. He questioned Cindy about the talk regarding him flirting with a waitress, expressing his dislike for such games. Cindy responded by saying she wasn't certain about the exact details, but that it supposedly occurred sometime last week. Jim remarked sarcastically about the vagueness of the information. Cindy then suggested that Jim might have a better understanding of the situation than she did, questioning if he flirts with every waitress. Surprised, Jim interjected, asking if he was told he kissed them. Cindy confirmed this, leading Jim to assert that there were only two possibilities. Either it was a mix-up or someone was feeding her lies, as he had only kissed Cindy since they started dating. Cindy gazed into his eyes. Though she usually felt she could gauge his honesty through his gaze, she wasn't entirely sure, as he had never lied to her as far as she knew. "Why would someone claim they saw you kissing a waitress if it wasn't true?" "Beats me," he shrugged, taking another bite from his burger. "Since she's your friend, ask her." "How do you know it's a woman?" "It better be a woman. If a male friend told you he saw me kissing a waitress, then you've got your answer." Initially, Cindy entertained the thought that he might have seen her friend in the restaurant and kissed the waitress anyway, disregarding the potential consequences. But she wasn't sure what he meant by his last statement. "What do you mean? If it's a man, I've answered my own question." "Simple. If it is a man, he's into you and trying to stir up trouble between us. He's probably hoping to cozy up to you by playing the supportive friend." "That's absurd." "Is it? Think about it. Was it a man?" "No." "All right, then we're back to square one. You'll have to ask your friend why she's misleading you." An uneasy silence followed as they both finished their lunches. When they were done, Jim had a few parting words. "This is Jenny's birthday party, and I won't let it be spoiled by a fight with your friend. So if you keep cozying up to him like you have been, I'll just leave you here and you can find your own way home. Or you can spend the night with Mr. Muscles, but then you won't have a home to come back to. Understand?" She was taken aback by his intensity. "Jim, calm down. I'm not going home with Bob. I wasn't even considering it. I was just trying to show you what it feels like to have your spouse flirting with someone else, that's all." "Well, now you've shown me, so let's end it here." He stood, took his wife's paper plate and empty beer bottle, and walked over to dispose of them. As he turned back, he was relieved to see his wife right by his side. Bob, however, was displeased. He had been sneaking glances at the two of them talking while he sat alone, eating his chicken patty. He had no doubt Cindy was genuinely interested. She was eager for action. However, he also acknowledged the need for discretion. Earlier, he had hoped for an opportunity to slip away with her, perhaps to an upstairs bedroom or his car, but now such plans were off the table. They were being watched. He'd have to postpone indulging his desires, at least for now. Despite their underlying tensions, Jim and Cindy were determined to enjoy the rest of the party. She stuck close to him for the remainder of the day, occasionally drifting off to chat with friends, but always returning to his side. The only other interaction Cindy had with Bob was during the group rendition of Happy Birthday, when everyone gathered around Jenny's cake. Bob took advantage of the moment to sidle up beside her and discreetly touch her backside while everyone sang. Initially, she assumed it was Jim, but when she glanced over, she saw Bob wearing a smug grin on his face. She was stunned by his audacity. Glancing around quickly to check for any observers, she found everyone focused on Jenny. Normally, she would have reacted by slapping him, but she knew it would only stir up trouble, something she desperately wanted to avoid. Besides, she realized it was partly her own fault for encouraging him. If given the chance, she'd apologize to him and make it clear she wasn't interested. He withdrew his hand to join the applause as the birthday girl effortlessly blew out the candles. Jim glanced over when he heard Bob's voice nearby, but saw nothing significant. Certainly, Cindy wasn't about to confess to Jim about Bob's inappropriate behavior during Happy Birthday. Naturally, Bob interpreted her silence as consent. He knew how to manipulate the situation. She had to stay close to her husband to avoid suspicion, but eventually she would need to slip away to use the restroom indoors. Hopefully, he could catch her alone to arrange a meeting. He'd keep a discreet watch. For those aware of the earlier incident, the perceived threat seemed to have passed. Much to their relief, both Bob and Cindy seemed to be on their best behavior, so, with the possible exception of Jim, they all relaxed and let down their guard. Jim, however, had encountered guys like Bob before, men who thought they were irresistible to women, and knew they were rarely dissuaded easily. Just to be cautious, he resolved to continue keeping an eye on the potential troublemaker. The party kicked into high gear after dinner. Tony turned up the outdoor speakers and played background music from Pandora while games were set up. A dartboard was placed on the large oak tree near the shed, and Jenny's friends helped her set up the beanbag toss. Some women gathered card tables for bingo. Jenny and her friends suggested a best-of-3 beanbag game to her parents, Jim and Cindy. Tony warned them about Jenny's skill. Fortunately, the adults won the first game, but the subsequent victories went to the youngsters. After the game, Cindy kissed Jim on the cheek and informed him that she needed to use the restroom and would return shortly. Jim replied that he might challenge Adam to a game of darts. Cindy stopped to chat with friends on her way to the house and was fortunate to find the downstairs restroom unoccupied, so she slipped inside. Adam observed Bob's departure and muttered to himself about it, catching Jim's attention. Jim paused mid-throw and inquired about Adam's comment. Adam clarified that Bob seemed to be leaving without saying goodbye or expressing gratitude for the invitation. Jim turned around and caught a glimpse of Bob exiting through the gate, suggesting that Bob might be upset because Cindy wasn't paying him attention anymore and mentioning that he probably had plans with her. Adam agreed, noting that Bob was skilled at charming women, recounting instances where he had seen Bob leave a bar with attractive women. Jim turned back to the dartboard, taking careful aim, when a thought struck him. How would someone enter the house without being seen? They'd leave through the gate, circle around to the front, and enter that way. Handing the darts to Adam, Jim mentioned that he would be right back before making his way toward the back door. Cindy had finished her business and was touching up her makeup. Upon opening the bathroom door, she was stunned to find Bob standing there. Before she could react, he seized her shoulders and pinned her against the doorframe, forcefully locking their lips together in an instant. Had Jim been a split second later, he would have witnessed his wife forcefully pushing Bob away. However, in that moment, she hesitated as she tried to regain her senses. It was then that Jim caught sight of them. He grabbed Bob's shoulder, pulling him away from Cindy, and with a forceful blow to Bob's solar plexus, sent him stumbling back into the washroom, where he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. As Cindy's brain struggled to process the rapid events, she felt overwhelmed. It all happened so quickly. She turned to find her husband, but he was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, she searched in every direction, calling out for Jim, but he was nowhere in sight. Then she heard the sound of a car starting. Rushing to the front door, Cindy watched as their car backed out and drove off, realizing how the situation must have appeared, especially given her previous interactions with Bob. Ignoring Bob, who was still gasping for breath, she dashed out the back door. The first person she encountered was Adam, who was still waiting for Jim's return, unaware of the unfolding drama.
"Adam, you have to drive me home, now!"
she pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. Confused, Adam looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "Cindy, what happened? Where's Jim? He left. He caught Bob kissing me and—" "What? Is he hurt?" "No, Bob's still in the house. I'm not sure if he's hurt or not. Jim punched him really hard." Adam couldn't help but smirk. "Jim punched Bob?" Yeah. Please, Adam. I have to get home so I can explain what happened. He was so mad, I'm not sure what he's going to do. I'm afraid he's planning to leave me." "I doubt that, Cindy. He's upset, but I don't think he's that upset. You didn't see him just now." "Cindy, I was the first one here. I doubt I'll be able to get my car out. I'm sure I'm blocked in." "Please, Adam." "All right. Give me a second to tell Tony we're leaving, and I'll see if we can get out of here." After briefing Tony, Adam returned, confirming their predicament. "Cindy, you'll have to call a cab. I can't get out, but you can borrow my car." "Are you serious? Thank you." Grateful and relieved, Cindy hurriedly got into Adam's car, knowing she needed to reach Jim before it was too late. There was only about a foot of space between Adam's car and the garage door. He turned the wheel completely to the right and edged forward until his front bumper gently nudged the door. Then he reversed, turning the wheel the other way, until his rear bumper lightly touched the car behind him. He repeated this maneuver several times until he could back out onto his brother's meticulously kept front lawn, leaving only about 2 inches of clearance between his car and the one behind. Throughout the journey, Cindy remained silent, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of her husband's enraged expression from her mind. His fury was unlike anything she had seen before, and his physical reaction was unprecedented. As they approached her driveway, anxiety gripped her. She dreaded facing whatever awaited her at home. Soon, they turned into her driveway, with Adam parking behind Jim's car. Adam offered to accompany her inside, but she hesitated briefly before declining, expressing gratitude but insisting that she would handle the situation herself, since she felt responsible for it. Upon exiting the car, she signaled to Adam that she would manage and climbed the porch stairs, each step filled with apprehension. Entering the house, she prepared herself for what she might encounter. Jim was nowhere to be seen, and she worried he might be upstairs packing. Just as she began ascending the stairs to confront him, she heard the coffee grinder. A glimmer of hope flickered within her as she thought, "He's making coffee?" Jim, observing her silently from the kitchen doorway, broke the silence by asking if her lover had brought her home. Cindy clarified to Jim that Bob was not her lover, mentioning that the last time she saw him, he was still on the bathroom floor, struggling to catch his breath. Jim nodded in response, but remained silent, which unsettled Cindy. She had expected some kind of reaction from him, whether it be anger or embarrassment. Since Jim seemed unwilling to speak, Cindy decided to take the initiative. "He caught me off guard, Jim. I wasn't willingly engaging with him. He ambushed me as soon as I opened the door, pushing me against it and kissing me. I didn't see you resisting him. You intervened before I had the chance. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what was happening, but you struck him before I could push him away." She still wasn't certain if her husband's behavior indicated genuine calmness or if it was merely the quiet before a storm. Throughout their conversation, he remained occupied with his tasks. She almost wished he would express his anger openly. His apparent indifference left her feeling anxious. "Well?" she prompted. "Well what?" he replied, hitting the start button on the coffee maker. "Jim, I've never seen you so angry before. I honestly expected you to be packing your bags when I got home." "Don't tempt me," he growled, his voice rising slightly. "You're damn right I'm angry. That stunt you pulled was immature and disrespectful. The only reason I'm not even more upset is because most people at the party knew what you were doing. But you know what infuriates me more than you making a spectacle of yourself? The fact that you chose to trust one of your shallow friends over me. Have I ever lied to you, huh? His suppressed anger began to surface. Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me or be jealous? No, never. She had never heard him refer to her friends as shallow before, but she chose not to address it. Honey, I know how outgoing you are. I've witnessed it. You can strike up a friendship with anyone in minutes, even women. You may not realize it, but I've seen the way they look at you when you walk away. I know they'd be willing to drop their inhibitions in an instant. Oh, that's ridiculous. You're making me sound like Brad Pitt or something. The situation was escalating. She needed to diffuse it before it escalated further. Jim, all I'm saying is that you have a charming personality. People are drawn to you. I just want you to understand that some women interpret that as flirting. They might think you're available, married or not. She hoped she had eased the tension. So, how does that justify you believing that I go around kissing waitresses and trusting your friend over your husband? Damn, she thought. She had hoped to avoid that question. Their argument persisted for another 20 minutes without resolution, both refusing to yield on the fundamental issue of trust. Despite their disagreement, neither of them opted to sleep on the couch or in separate rooms, but Cindy sensed that closeness was out of the question. He wasn't in a forgiving mood, and she wasn't willing to degrade herself by attempting to change his mind. The following Tuesday, Jim met Tony for a drink after work. Jim was already seated and had just taken a sip from his beer when his friend arrived, wearing a wide grin. "Yo, Rocky, how's Adrian?" Tony quipped, attempting a Stallone impression. Jim glanced at his friend. "Isn't Rocky the one who talks like that?" "Yeah, but I can't pull off a Burgess Meredith impression, so you'll have to settle for what you get," he chuckled. Taking a seat beside Jim, he ordered a beer. "Seriously, how are things between you two?" "Right now, we're barely on speaking terms. I'm still angry, and she knows it, so she tends to avoid me."
When are you going to cut her some slack? Most people at the party didn't even realize there was any tension between you two. After you left, some folks were asking about you and Cindy.
"What did you tell them?" "I said something unexpected came up, and you had to leave. Nobody questioned it. They probably assumed you two were eager to get home and, well, you know," Tony chuckled. "Yeah, well, we haven't exactly been eager to get in bed since the party. Speaking of which, what's the deal with Bob? Is he plotting revenge?" "I doubt it. Adam filled me in on what happened before he drove Cindy home. When I went inside, Bob was just getting back on his feet. He mentioned you landed a sucker punch." "I sure did," Jim interjected. "Well, he was talking about getting back at you, but I warned him to steer clear of you. I told him you're the toughest guy around and that I've seen you take down guys twice your size. I even threw in my favorite Bible quote." "You have a favorite Bible quote? I didn't know that." "Sure do. Yeah, though he walks through the valley of the shadow of pass away, he fears no evil, for he's the toughest and meanest SOB in the valley." "That's you." Jim couldn't help but laugh. "That's nonsense, and you know it," he retorted. "Of course I know it, and you know it, but Bob doesn't. I think I scared him enough to make him think twice before messing with you." "Well, I appreciate that, buddy." They both grinned and took another sip of their drinks. "You know what really annoys me," Jim began, "that she doesn't believe me about not kissing some waitress." "Are you absolutely sure you didn't? Maybe just a peck on the cheek or something like that." "No, He trailed off, and Tony could tell from his expression that he recalled something. "Ah, huh. You did kiss her, didn't you?" "No, she kissed me," Jim responded. "Damn, I know what this is all about." The following day, Cindy was surprised to see Jim walking into her office at work. He immediately informed her that he was taking her to lunch before she could react. Assuming it was his way of apologizing, she expressed gratitude, but mentioned it was a bit early and asked if he could wait about 20 minutes. Jim reassured her, saying there was no need to wait. He had already spoken to her boss, explained the situation as a minor family emergency, and arranged for an extended lunch hour, which her boss agreed to. Jim urged her to come along, and Cindy, feeling apprehensive as she wasn't aware of any family emergencies, followed him to the car. As she got in, Jim held the door for her. She questioned him about their destination and the nature of the family emergency. He didn't directly answer her question, but instructed her to call her friend and get the name of the restaurant where the alleged incident occurred. When she asked why, he simply told her to trust him and mentioned that he believed he had figured something out. Reluctantly, she called her friend and obtained the restaurant's name, DeMars on Homan Avenue. He responded with a smile. commenting on the coincidence that they were headed exactly there. Cindy remained silent, but felt increasingly uneasy. She couldn't fathom why he would want to revisit the scene, except perhaps to confront her. Would he flirt with the waitress in front of her? She knew he wouldn't do that. She decided to wait and see what unfolded. The journey to the restaurant took nearly half an hour, during which Cindy agonized over numerous scenarios. She was almost in tears when they arrived. Jim placed his hand on her back and guided her inside. She knew trouble awaited her the moment they entered.
Damn,
she muttered quietly. Jim found a booth and had Cindy sit first, then joined her. Well, cuz, looks like you brought your better half today. Cindy blushed with embarrassment.
Hi, Marilyn,
she greeted their waitress.
Hi, Cindy. How did you manage to get my cousin here for a real lunch? And with his wife, no less. Every time I see him, he's in such a hurry he can barely eat,
she joked. Jim wasn't about to let Cindy off easily.
Cindy seems to think you and I are having a passionate affair, he announced.
Cindy waited for the punchline before responding.
What?
No, Marilyn, that's not true. Cindy turned to her husband. Jim, come on, I made a mistake. I apologize. She faced Marilyn again. A friend told me last week that he kissed a waitress here. I didn't even know you worked here. But we haven't... Last week, Jim interrupted. You gave me a peck on the cheek when I arrived. Oh gosh, Cindy, I didn't mean anything by it. Jim hadn't visited in a while, and it was just a friendly gesture.
Marilyn, don't worry about it, Cindy assured her.
I understand now. My friend misled me into thinking Jim had a thing with a waitress here. I'll be giving her a piece of my mind later. I'd like to hear that, Jim challenged. Cindy looked at him and accepted the challenge. All right, she said, retrieving her phone from her purse. Both Jim and Marilyn listened in on Cindy's side of the conversation. Hi, Linda. Not too good. You know that waitress who you said was kissing Jim? You know who that was? Jim's cousin? Yeah, his cousin. No, I didn't appreciate you telling me. You made it sound like he was having an affair or something. I don't care what you thought. I don't care if you think you see him screwing somebody in the middle of the floor. From now on, keep your gossip to yourself. Yeah, you too. She almost hurt her finger disconnecting. Jim had a hunch it was Linda stirring up trouble. She frequently made derogatory remarks about her own husband. Cindy was worked up after the call. I truly apologize. To both of you. Jim was right. I should have known better. You have a few more apologies to make when you get home tonight, Jim reminded her. You're going to apologize to Tony, Barbara, and Jenny. What about Bob? You can tell Bob to take a hike. You don't pursue a married woman, no matter how much of a flirt she is. Marilyn was still standing nearby. Who's Bob? She asked. Her boyfriend, Jim joked. Boyfriend? She questioned. Don't listen to him, Marilyn. I made a mistake and he's not done rubbing my nose in it yet. It sounds like you two had quite a weekend, Marilyn observed. Let's just say I'm pretty sure Cindy learned a lesson about trust, Jim replied. Cindy was more than a little embarrassed. Her face flushed as she opened the menu. So, Marilyn, what do you recommend? Later, after dinner, Cindy spent almost an hour on the phone, apologizing to their friends, including Jenny. That night, they both lay undressed in bed. Are you still mad? It depends. On what? On whether you still think I would cheat on you. I never really believed you'd cheat on me. I was worried you might give some woman the wrong impression. I just didn't want you leading her on. He considered her words and remembered how angry he felt watching her flirt with Bob. He'd never admit it, but he did understand her perspective a bit better now. Just as he was about to tell her he forgave her, he felt her hand slide down his body and start tickling his balls. Come on, honey. You can't stay mad at me, she cooed. He decided he might not tell her he forgave her just yet. Her fingers gently wrapped around his manhood and slowly started stroking it up and down. Within seconds, he felt himself getting hard. Jim closed his eyes and let out a small sigh as her long red hair teased his skin. The loving touch of her lips sent shivers down his spine as she kissed the head of his fully engorged friend. Oh, God, he groaned. She already knew she was forgiven, but Cindy wanted to take it to the limit. She swung one leg over his torso and guided him inside her. She closed her eyes as she leaned forward, resting her hands on his tight abs as she moved back and forth, driving him deeper and deeper. Oh, babe, I'm not going to last long, he groaned. Me either, she replied. Moments later, she threw her head back as her body stiffened. That was Jim's cue, and it was right on time as they both surrendered to an intense pleasure. A month later, Cindy and Barbara were having lunch together. You and Jim seem to be getting along. Does he still flirt with waitresses? Not as much, Cindy replied. He's still his friendly self, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that about him, but he does seem to pull back now and then.
That's all you really wanted, isn't it?
Exactly. Barbara had to ask her next question, even though she thought she knew the answer.
So, have you heard from Bob lately?
No, and I'm a little insulted, to tell you the truth. One punch and he just disappears, the wimp. They both laughed at that.